Hi, my name is Patricia and welcome to the journey through the book of Ruth. We saw in the previous episode that Ruth received promises of protection and privilege and just enjoyed a complete meal, probably the first in a long time. And as we also observed in the previous episode, these two individuals are advancing in their relationship without Naomi, or so it seems. While Ruth benefits from the kindness of Boaz, Naomi is still not part of the alliance of the covenant with Boaz. But we know that Ruth is attached to Naomi, so her chance to rest is closely linked to Ruth's situation. Boaz committed himself to Ruth, but what are his true intentions? Single men do not casually establish this type of alliance with single women, or in this case, widows. But so far, he has not given any indication that he plans to go ahead with an intention of marriage. So let's try to understand why he hasn't taken the next step yet. In chapter 2, verse 14, we learn that he concluded his meeting with a meal of alliance. And let's go back to this point. Ruth chapter 2, verses 14 through 19. At mealtime, Boaz said to her, "Come over here, have some bread and dip it in the wine vinegar." When she sat down with the harvesters, he offered her some roasted grain. She ate all she wanted and had some left over. As she got up to glean, Boaz gave orders to his men, "Let her gather among the sheaves and don't reprimand her. Even pull out some stalks for her from the bundles and leave them for her to pick up, and don't rebuke her." So Ruth gleaned in the field until evening. Then she threshed the barley she had gathered, and it amounted to about an ephah. She carried it back to town, and her mother-in-law saw how much she had gathered. Ruth also brought out and gave her what she had left over after she had eaten enough. Her mother-in-law asked her, "Where did you glean today? Where did you work? Blessed be the man who took notice of you." Ruth told her mother-in-law who she had worked with. The name of the man was Boaz. Boaz served Ruth, but he just had made Ruth a servant in his house. As the master of the house, he was serving one of his servants. Ruth must also have been surprised by this attitude. Then we see that he also honored her with a large portion of grains, so much that Ruth could not eat everything. We remember the story in Genesis when Joseph invited his brothers to eat at his table in Egypt. He intentionally reversed the rules of the day, giving the youngest son, Benjamin, much more food than he gave the other brothers. Joseph did this to test the hearts of his brothers and see if they would be jealous of the luck of the younger brother. In the same way, Boaz gave Ruth this double portion for a reason. It was not an accident or simply a miscalculation, nor is it an insignificant detail in the story. Boaz is working behind the scenes to bless Naomi too, and he hopes Ruth will take the excess and share it with her mother-in-law. And again, we see how he does his work silently through Ruth to bless Naomi. He could have told Ruth to bring her mother-in-law, but instead he lets Ruth share the blessing with her. Boaz begins to fulfill his promises to protect her, providing shelter for the night at his house, probably in the servants' rooms. It was too late for her to return home to be with her mother-in-law, and traveling after dusk was dangerous for anyone, especially for a woman alone. So when Ruth got up the next morning to continue her work in Boaz's field, he fulfills his promise of provision for her. He guides his servants, in verse 15, to allow Ruth to work freely in the field, while she collects the remains, which no one prevents her work. The workers could find the presence of a beggar like Ruth an inconvenience that would hinder their work. But Boaz ensures that the servants know that Ruth has the same right to be in the field, and goes a step further, giving Ruth an advantage in her work. The law allowed the widows to work where the harvest had already taken place, and in the grains standing in the corners of the field. This would give a woman enough to eat daily, but it was not an easy or rewarding job. The person would have to work all day, looking among the old stalks on the ground to find a good one here and another there, and would also have to compete with other widows and needy. But for Ruth, Boaz instructed his servants that she could harvest the grains standing up, even before they were cut by the farmers. Obviously, it would be much easier for Ruth to harvest grains in these circumstances. Now she had the guarantee of having abundance every day. In fact, I imagine that the servants would have to encourage Ruth to venture into the grains standing up to harvest them, since this was usually against the rules. Boaz was fulfilling his promise to provide and guarantee her rest. In a sense, he is doing the work for her, or at least making this work easier. But in reality, Ruth is being carried by Boaz's kindness, experiencing a degree of success far beyond her abilities. Boaz took away her concern, uncertainty, and fear, but not her need to serve and work. Ruth will still work, but her work will be now easier, and the rewards even greater, and without fear of failing. But Boaz goes even further. He instructs his servants intentionally to pull some of the grains previously collected and tied by the farmers and let them fall for her. They should spread these grains discreetly on the ground where they would be easily found by Ruth. Interesting that he's doing this without making her feel uncomfortable because of his generosity. So every day for about 6 weeks, Ruth goes to the fields and enjoys an abundant harvest. And here we see how Boaz represents what it is to work for our Master Jesus. Ruth's work in the field is an image of the church working for the Lord, who brought us into a relationship through his covenant. He called us all to serve him and told us that his burden is light. Ruth saw her work reach an unexpected harvest. And so it will be when we serve the Lord. You and I were called to make the priorities of Christ ours, to work in his fields, not in the world's field. But what kind of work are we talking about? Literally, anything, everything. They are not just those who are in the ministry full-time or missionaries or even volunteers in the church. We are talking about mothers who serve Christ in their homes, fathers who serve Christ working to provide for their families and leading them to a relationship with Jesus. Children, obedient sons and daughters representing Christ in their schools. Men and women representing Christ at all levels of society, praying for each other's needs, dedicating time and attention to those who are lonely or suffering, serving in the work that the Lord gave to each one. As we do this work, we live our lives with all its duties, and the Lord will prepare the field to guarantee the harvest. And he literally instructs his servants to help us. Just as the servants of Boaz followed Ruth and facilitated her work, so do the servants of the Lord. And what servants are we talking about? Who did Jesus designate to follow us, throwing grains in our path, so to speak? The Hebrew writer says that the angels of the Lord were created for this purpose. In Hebrews chapter 1, verse 14 we read, "Are not all angels ministering spirits sent to serve those who will inherit salvation?" The angelic kingdom is working behind the scenes to ensure that our work is productive, ensuring that we have results far beyond what we could achieve on our own. And just as the servants of Boaz helped Ruth without her knowing, the angels also work beyond our perception. Most of the time we can't see them or even know how they work, but we can see the results when we set out to serve Christ, live our lives committed to his word. We can believe that he and his angels are with us, but you won't see help coming before you take the first step of faith. Like Ruth, she couldn't see the harvest unless she went into the field and started working. Ruth wouldn't see the miraculous provision of the grace of Boaz staying at home. She had to start working. And we, in the same way, when we start working, we can see that God will fulfill His promise to make the work fruitful. We can see the impact of the grace of Boaz on the first day of Ruth's harvest. In verse 17, we have the information that she harvested 1 heifer of grains. A heifer is approximately 35 liters or 21 kilos of barley grains. Normally, a person wouldn't harvest all this on a common day of work in the field. So we understand Naomi's surprise when she saw the amount that Ruth brought home. She was probably praying to receive just a small bag of grains, perhaps enough for a meal or two for both. Instead, Ruth appears with food for a whole week, and she also brings the cooked, toasted grains left over from the dinner the night before. So Naomi not only has a large amount of raw grains, but also the joy of a ready meal. And so Ruth is fulfilling her promise to be a blessing to her mother-in-law. And she did it because Boaz fulfilled his promise to be a blessing to her. And so we can say that Boaz was the means for both women to receive a blessing. So let's read Naomi's reaction in verses 19 and 20. Her mother-in-law asked her, "Where did you glean today? Where did you work? Blessed be the man who took notice of you." Then Ruth told her mother-in-law about the one whose place she had been working. "The name of the man I worked with today is Boaz," she said. "The Lord bless him," Naomi said to her daughter-in-law. "He has not stopped showing his kindness to the living and the dead." She added, "That man is our close relative. He is one of our relative redeemers." Naomi immediately understood that there was no way Ruth had gotten so much grain under normal circumstances. Something unusual had happened, and Ruth tells her story. And when she reveals the name of the kind man, she recognizes the name, Boaz. He was from her family. Then Naomi praised the Lord, exclaiming that the Lord had not withdrawn his kindness from the living and the dead. And here she was talking about her womb and Ruth's. The living referred to Ruth and the dead referred to Naomi. Ruth has a living womb in the sense that she's still young enough to have children. And having children was the survival line of a woman in those days. A woman who could have children still had a chance to find a husband, because the posterity of a man was linked to his descendants. In the same way, Naomi refers to the dead one because she is beyond the years of having children. And she knows she has no chance of getting married again, which made her even more bitter. But now, at this moment, Naomi sees that the Lord is working to take care of them both. Through the kindness of Boaz, we can then even understand why Boaz could be interested in showing kindness to a young widow like Ruth. But extending his kindness through Ruth to Naomi is something completely different. Ruth chapter 2, verses 21 and 22. Then Ruth the Moabite said, "He even said to me, 'Stay with my workers until they finish harvesting all my grain.'" Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, "It will be good for you, my daughter, to go with the woman who worked for him, because in someone else's field you might be harmed." In another crop they could bother her, so Ruth stayed with Boaz's servants to collect grains until the harvest of barley and wheat was over. However, she stayed living with her mother-in-law. Naomi expressed concern about what would happen to Ruth if she went to another property, because this is the time of the judges. So Ruth stays close to Boaz throughout the harvest of barley and until the next harvest. The barley is harvested in spring around Easter or the Jewish Passover, and the wheat is harvested about 6 weeks later, and Ruth's work provided enough grain to live throughout this time. So for a while, Ruth had the joy of working in Boaz's field. She was blessed with protection and provision. And during this same period, Naomi was also blessed, although at a distance. But the harvest does not last forever, so Naomi, anticipating that the harvest time is ending, begins to plan the future. She knows that Boaz made a commitment to Ruth, but not to her. So she begins to help Ruth consolidate the relationship with him, and her plan focuses on the connection of Boaz with Naomi as her relative. Ruth chapter 3, verses 1 to 5. One day, Ruth's mother-in-law, Naomi, said to her, "My daughter, I must find a home for you where you will be well provided for. Now Boaz, with whose woman you have worked, is a relative of ours. Tonight he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. Wash, put on perfume, and get dressed in your best clothes. Then go down to the threshing floor, but don't let him know you are there. You are there until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, note the place where he is lying. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what to do." "I will do whatever you say," Ruth answered. Naomi tells Ruth that she wants to look for a safer future for her. And she's not just talking about financial security. She's talking about getting her a husband. Ruth needs to have the security that, at that time, only a husband could provide her. And she knows that if Ruth gets the husband's security, it will benefit her too. So Naomi tells Ruth that Boaz is the redeemer relative of the family. And now, let's explain this term. It's a legal term coming from Moses' law in Deuteronomy chapter 25. Just as the law provided a way of sustenance for the widows, this same law guaranteed a posterity for the tribes in Israel. In Deuteronomy chapter 25, verses 5 and 6, we read, "If brothers are living together and one of them dies without a son, his widow must not marry outside the family. Her husband's brother shall take her and marry her and fulfill the duty of a brother-in-law to her. The first son she bears shall carry on the name of the dead brother, so that his name will not be blotted out from Israel." So we read that the husband's brother will marry the widow and fulfill her brother-in-law's duty. The first child she has will take the name of the deceased brother, so that his name is not erased from Israel. The law then demanded that the single brother of the dead man marry the widow of his brother. So the first son, male, fruit from this marriage, would technically be considered a descendant of the dead man. When this son becomes an adult, he would inherit the property of his deceased father and would continue the name of the family. The purpose of this law was twofold. First, it provided a second chance for the widowed woman to obtain the security and rest of a husband and a son. Second, it a guarantee that the name of the family of the dead man was not cut off among the tribes of Israel. The name given to the man who redeemed his brother's widow is Redeemer. And this is the situation of Ruth. Ruth married a Jewish man who later died without a son. And as such, she should be redeemed by the deceased husband's brother. But in this case, the husband's brother also died. So the law demanded that the closest single man relative assume the duty of marrying her. When we return to the study in the next episode, we will see Naomi's advice to Ruth. And when we explore these events, we will return to the prophetic meaning of this beautiful story in the book of Ruth. See you next time.